Welcome back to Virtualizing Your Data Center with Hyper-V and System Center. I'm Simon Perryman, joined again by Matt McSpirit, and we're wrapping up the day now having covered kind of a lot of different key virtualization pieces. We built our fabrics, we built our hosts, we built our VMs, and then we started to explore the different management capabilities. But Microsoft has always designed our technologies with a cloud-first engineering approach, thinking about how can we run this and build this the same way on-premise that we go run and deploy it in a public cloud or in a third-party hosted cloud. And we think this consistency of experience is a big strength, a big advantage we have. When we think about a developer building an application, they shouldn't have to think, what type of cloud am I going to run this on? They just want to build an app, put it in the VM, and have it work. When we think about security with Active Directory, we want to make sure that our identity is shared on-premise and off-premise. When we do management with System Center and Hyper-V, we want that same consistent experience regardless of which cloud our applications are running on. And last but not least, for our database administrators, we have our SQL Service on-premise and SQL Service running in the cloud. So Matt, now that we've kind of covered our pitch here, why we're so focused on cloud and the value that we're adding, why don't you talk a little more about virtualization with hybrid cloud? And what exactly is hybrid cloud?
Good question. So hybrid cloud in the context that we're going to discuss it today is very much about utilizing that, let's call it infinite capacity to a large extent that exists in these public cloud resources, whether it be in a public cloud service like Windows Azure or whether it's something that exists within a service provider infrastructure, and extending the reach of your own data center and embracing those capabilities that exist within the public cloud, but bridging them in such a way that it becomes a natural extension of your environment. And that's key, is it's embracing those, not just as a remote public cloud service that exists in isolation, but a hybrid cloud that you can build and manage with a central set of tools that allow you to span those different data center environments. That essentially is what hybrid cloud is from this context that we're discussing, and enables you with scenarios like Simon discussed of deploying the application where it makes most economical, performance sense to deploy that particular workload. So when we look through some of these capabilities, imagine the scenario where we have got our public or private cloud that we built throughout the day. We built our fabric, we built our clouds on top, we've got our aggregated capacity and infrastructure, and we have options to connect it to a service provider private cloud through a site-to-site VPN, whether it's built into Windows Server 2012 R2 and utilize the gateway functionality there, or whether it's using a third-party solution to provide secure VPNs, of which there are many out there from the leading networking vendors, that would allow you to essentially extend your infrastructure, utilizing network virtualization or not, it's up to you, to extend your infrastructure across and consume some of the capacity, in this example of a service provider, running some of your VMs in a dedicated cloud space of their overall capacity, or in a shared infrastructure running on their multi-tenant platform that they've built, or alternatively, connecting it using the Windows Azure virtual networking capabilities and site-to-site connectivity to extend your data center into Azure. So creating your VM networks in Azure, mapping them and relating them to your on-premise networks and allowing seamless connectivity between on-premise workloads and workloads that you spin up in Azure. So they're the concepts of hybrid cloud, but managing those workloads and maintaining them as if it's one big network. Again, whether you're using virtualized networks or not, this is still applicable. You can still connect your infrastructure up into the cloud, whether it be service providers, whether it be Windows Azure, connecting to your on-premise private cloud. And then when we think about how we start to enable that, we can utilize the site-to-site VPN capabilities that are built into Windows Server to enable that secure connectivity. And here on the slide, we have a couple of examples. We've got a Contoso private cloud, we've got a Woodgrove private cloud with multiple subnets, and we've got different clouds that are existing in different physical locations outside of their main enterprise. So they're connecting to service provider platforms within the environment through secure site-to-site tunnels. So we're now allowing us to connect across geographical locations, across separate enterprises, so connecting our hosted cloud with secure branch offices. Again, mapping those subnets, those networks, and creating a seamless connection across all of those. In this case, the hosted cloud is hosting both Contoso and Woodgrove services, but in the respective remote sites in London and New York, they're securely connected to the Contoso cloud, and the Woodgrove Brazilian branch, in this case, connected again through a secure site-to-site tunnel. Now, the difference there is that Contoso and London branch could be using something like the site-to-site features and capabilities built into Windows Server 2012 R2 and that secure gateway, whereas the Woodgrove Brazilian branch could be using something slightly different, an industry standard appliance maybe to connect up those environments. And you'll see those differentiated at the bottom there. The key thing is that private cloud expanding to consume and extend its infrastructure reach across to the geographical locations around the globe, but providing a seamless, secure set of connectivity. When we think about hybrid connectivity, let's think about it in splitting it into three pillars. You've got your service provider, you've got the internet that exists, the gap between your environment and theirs, and your remote sites, your sites that are existing perhaps in your enterprise environment. So think about those and how we defined our network virtualization before. Think about that in this context. We've got our blue, red, and green enterprises, our own different customers, different infrastructures, all existing within their own locations, of which blue has 2 sites, red has a single site, and green has a couple of sites as well. And then the service provider, using network virtualization, has created 3 clouds, 3 isolated VM networks, 1 for each of those customers. Now, to connect them up, you can utilize the clustered multi-tenant site-to-site gateway built into Windows Server 2012 R2. Now, these clustered gateways mean that they are resilient to failure. If one goes down, there is another, so that's the whole point of clustering. We can manage it through VMM, we can manage it through PowerShell, and that management is done on the hosting or service provider side. It's not something the remote sites really need to configure and have access to. It's redundant for high availability, and it uses BGP for that dynamic routing. Now, when we start to see how we establish the tunnels there, from each site, a site-to-site tunnel, so multiple site-to-site tunnels from those respective enterprises to our site-to-site gateway, and that will then be mapped on to our respective VM networks to allow different solutions, different connectivity, not only from within the 4 walls of the enterprises, enterprise blue, red, and green, obviously connect directly through the site-to-site tunnel to their respective blue network, but the multi-tenant gateway can also accept from outside of the enterprises as well, so from the internet where made appropriate. If we see in the bottom that laptop there, that could be a user accessing a resource that's contained within the green VM network in the service provider site, but rather than going into the enterprise via VPN and then along the site-to-site tunnel VPN to access their resource, we can set up capabilities that enable them to access via the gateway itself as well. So loads of cool stuff there. It's really powerful. It's in the box, so there's no cost associated with it, but there are obviously partner appliances and solutions out there that you could also choose to consume. So that hybrid cloud opens up a lot of different scenarios around consuming and connecting different network infrastructures and making those workloads available across a broad spectrum of devices and infrastructures. When we think about Azure, Azure could be that extension of your data center that you're looking for. It's pay-per-use, pay-as-you-go type approach to consumption of capacity, could be very flexible for certain workloads. And with the secure networking, it could just be an extension of your data center. So the ability to have a database server on-premise and the web server front-end in Azure and connecting them seamlessly through a secure virtual network could be very valuable for a lot of organizations to offload some of those lighter workloads into the public cloud, internet-facing, but then have the database connectivity for that app on-premise for perhaps data compliancy reasons or whatever it may be. So integrating those, if we look here, you can see the Azure Infrastructure Services. We can spin up new Windows servers and Linux VMs in minutes. We can use the templates that exist within Windows Server to enable us to do that. And the virtual networking that Simon alluded to before, not only is it easy to set up in Azure, but also at the end of one of the wizards around networking, it produces a VPN script that we can incorporate into our on-premise VPN to establish the secure connection. So it's trying to make it as easy as possible. It's a rich, intuitive interface for managing virtual machines, and once deployed, we can utilize tools like App Controller, as we can see on the slide there, to connect to our Azure infrastructure and deploy VMs either directly into Azure or from our on-premise repositories, push our virtual templates, our virtual machines, up into Windows Azure as well, which is really, really useful and powerful and enables us to, again, integrate that Azure infrastructure services running in the public cloud with what's going on on-premise. And you can see there a view on the right-hand side of our templates. Some of them exist in the public cloud already, so SQL, standard, we can see there as well. We've got Contoso images as well. ones we've uploaded from our on-premises infrastructure into Windows Azure. So when we're deploying new VMs in Azure, we're using resources that exist up there, like templates that not only Microsoft provide, but we have uploaded as well, which is pretty useful. When we think about that connectivity, to explore it in one level deeper, you're going to extend your infrastructure using the site-to-site VPN. So we're using a VPN device, a site-to-site capability with Windows Server, or with a third-party solution to extend into Azure, where you've defined virtual networks that map to your physical infrastructure and your physical data center. You'll see even within Azure, we're able to create different subnets. You'll see virtual networks, subnet 1, subnet 2, subnet 3. These can map to respective networks that exist within our physical environment as well. We've also pushed a DNS server up there. And once we've connected our two sites, we've now got the ability for these different resources to communicate with one another, which is very valuable. In addition, not only can we communicate via the on-premise VPN solutions, but as I alluded to before, remote workers who need to access resources that are within the subnets running in Azure, they can access directly through that VPN gateway into Azure rather than going via the on-premises infrastructure, because that may seem like a rather long way to go through to get to what is essentially publicly accessible through secure channels. So Azure gives us a lot of flexibility. It's a great public cloud service that you can utilize to extend your data center. And as I said, you pay as you go, you pay as you consume. So if you're only using it lightly, your bills will be very low. As you use and consume more capacity, your bills would obviously increase across network, storage, and compute. And that's really where I wanted to finish on hybrid. It really relates nicely to virtualization. I realize a lot of you are still new to Hyper-V and virtual infrastructure on the Microsoft platform, but know this, that there is an extension, there's a direction you can go if you grow out of your own on-premises infrastructure. We talked about a service, Hyper-V Recovery Manager, using Azure to handle that Hyper-V replica across your sites, but we can also use it to actually host our VMs using the IaaS functionality within Azure and extend our data center seamlessly between the two. So it's a really powerful platform, and if you've got an MSDN subscription, you can certainly try it out as part of your subscription as well. You just need to activate that. So it's pretty easy to embrace.
Thanks, Matt. Well, we talked about embracing the public cloud. Now we're going to talk about embracing VMware. Talking about how we can use System Center to go and manage our diverse ESX infrastructure. Now, we wanted to position System Center as a way to manage other management systems as well. Not make people have to decide, do I want to use System Center or do I want to use vCenter? We're able to list System Center on top of vCenter, on top of Xen servers, on top of a lot of these distributed application management systems, integration throughout the stack. And again, not just on our hypervisors, but through IT management systems like ServiceNow, BMC Remedy. Manage different application frameworks like .NET, Ruby on Rails, Java, PHP. So we really just wanted to provide a solution that's going to work for everyone. And we think that System Center is going to give you those capabilities to manage that. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about Virtual Machine Manager. The biggest thing to keep in mind here is that when we actually use Virtual Machine Manager with VMware, there is a dependency on vCenter. Excuse me. We still need to use vCenter as kind of an intermediary to send commands. The reason for this is that the individual ESX or ESXi hosts, they don't have open APIs that we can call. So we essentially speak to vCenter, and then vCenter goes and speaks to the individual host that it manages. Now with Citrix management, there's no dependency on Xen Center. We can speak to each of those Xen servers individually, so you don't have that kind of middleman sitting in there. Now, as far as what we can do, what we can't do with the VMware infrastructure, we can do what we call 90% of day-to-day normal operations. Full disclosure, there are a few things that we just can't do. You know, when we start to configure port profiles, get very detailed on the advanced settings of the distributed vSwitch, that's where we still have to recommend, hey, this is kind of a one-time configuration. You're going to have to go back to vCenter and make those changes. We can see those changes, and we can continue managing it, integrating with it. But so, again, some of these advanced configuration centers still need to go back to vCenter. What we're essentially able to do, though, as far as kind of key configuration and setup tasks, is go and add resources to our library. We could create templates and services and use those on top of our VMware infrastructure. So I could create a service template. I can have one for Hyper-V hosts, one for VMware hosts, still get to manage both of them through VMware with similar scaling capabilities. We had the ability to do load balancing through this dynamic optimization feature, where we're redistributing the actual VM memory capacity across our different hosts. We also had the ability to go and deploy it to these actual hosts, push the VM there. So as we kind of think about what you do day to day, kind of built in across the stack here. Let's actually go and take a look at vCenter and some of our management capabilities that we have here. So I'm going to go back into System Center Virtual Machine Manager. And you can see right now, I don't really have any vCenter integration. Now, the challenge that I have here is I actually don't have a vCenter server built in. If I wanted to go and add one, I could go through this wizard, adding a new vCenter server, provide a name, vCenter, provide a run as account. In this case, probably use a different run as account. Click OK. And then what we're actually going to do is try to go and find that particular vCenter. Again, we're going to have a problem with this particular operation because I just don't have the vCenter installed. So that is expected here. But what I can show you is some of our management capabilities through our library. So let's go over here and select our library. Down here under my library server, we've gone and we've added a folder called VMware. And I'll quickly show you what's contained in here. These are essentially offline VMware files that I'm now being able to manage using Virtual Machine Manager. So here you have an offline VMware virtual machine. We can take a look at the VMX file if we want and take a look at some of the version information. So here we can see virtual hardware version 9, configuration version 8. We can see that here I also have my VMDK file. VMDK is kind of equivalent to a virtual hard disk, a .vhd file that we would see over in Hyper-V. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to go and import this information. So I'm going to say import a physical resource. I'm going to say add a resource. I'm going to browse to that file share I just had open. And I'm going to select my VMDK file. I then say, where do I want to place it? We'll go place it on our library server. Click import. And what we're now doing is taking that file and we're reading the metadata that's contained. So the metadata includes information such as, how big is the disk, what type of hypervisor should it run on. Now if I go down and take a look at this, here's my newly imported VMDK file. As we take a look at the details down here, big things to note are the type is VMDK and the virtualization platform VMware ESX. So what does this mean? This means that if I try to deploy a VM and use this VMDK file for my virtual hard disk, I would have to deploy it on a VMware server. Hyper-V doesn't understand this VMDK file. Now, if I wanted to fully migrate over to the Hyper-V server, which we're going to show you a little later, we'll take you through that process, and we're actually extracting the metadata, doing a conversion, and going from a VMDK over to a VHD. But essentially, now we have this object in our library. We could go manage it, include it in service templates, include it in VM templates, and essentially give us a whole lot of different management options for how we can go reuse this as a redeployable service. Now, Matt, do you have anything else to show us here?
Yeah, I can actually show you some of my working vCenter environment, my VMware environment that's being managed by VMM. So if we want to hook over to my environment, back in VMM, as we said multiple times today, I've actually imported my vCenter already, so vCenter 02 in this case. You'll notice it's version 5.1. That's the latest version that VMM 2012 R2 supports, not 5.5 at this point in time. I've got a couple of hosts and some managed VMs. Now, once you import your vCenter, you then, within your Fabric view, you're able to go to Home, add resources, VMware ESX hosts and clusters, and it will scan the vCenter. You provide it some credentials that are relevant to the ESXi hosts themselves. So that's the ESX or ESXi host, not the vCenter credentials. You only need the vCenter credentials when you bring in vCenter specifically. Your ESXi and ESX hosts may have different credentials. We'll go next, and we'll see that I've already brought in these particular hosts and clustered and so on. I can choose to bring in certain hosts and leave others. I've got the option there. Now, I've already brought those into management, so I'll cancel out, and you'll see my VMware cluster here, of which it's got a couple of hosts within that particular cluster. Now, if I go to VMs and services, you heard Simon say before, it's about the day-to-day management. So it's about deploying VMs, building VMs, and moving VMs around. So much so that I can initiate tasks like, for instance, if I right-click this VM, migrate virtual machine. So I can trigger a vMotion of this particular VM. You'll notice all of the Hyper-V hosts are not considered good candidates for this one. In fact, this particular VM, let's try a different one while it's waiting. Let's try WS01. Let's try this one. This one hopefully gives me a better result. There we go, 4 stars. This one's good to go to move from host 2 to host 3. If I click next and move, that's going to initiate a vMotion. So it's going to talk from VMM over to vCenter, trigger a vMotion, and that's going to vMotion that particular VM from host 2 to host 3. Now, those kind of day-to-day activities, that's what VMM can do, and it can do vMotion, storage vMotion. I can also, if I go to my library, and I go to import VMware template. Now, while Simon copied the VMDK into the file, into the VMM's library, it may be that you may want to import VMware templates. Now, I've already imported this one in, so I'm not going to re-import it, but I would tick this, click OK, and that would import the metadata about this template. It wouldn't move the VMDK to the library, because if I'm then going to deploy back to vSphere hosts, that's a bit of an unnecessary file copy, especially because most of your templates are probably going to be stored on a VMFS volume over with your vSphere hosts. So to bring it to VMM and to copy it back, it's not necessarily a valuable exercise. But if we reference it from VMM, that can be a good method. So if I look in my templates here, in my VM templates, you'll see Windows Server 2012. If I bring this one up, you'll see from a hardware config, it uses SCSI as one device. There's the VMware adapter type. If I expand this out, you'll see it's got a VMDK file that's actually on a VMFS volume. It's not residing in the VMM library, just like Simon showed. So there's different approaches, connected to legacy, connected to a network adapter, certain memory and processor and so on. And I can still now, because it's part of VMM, I can apply all of that template goodness that we talked about before to a VMware environment, to a VMware VMDK file. So I can apply lots of granular OS config, app config, SQL Server config. I can do all of that cool stuff even though the base image is actually based on a VMDK. And the nice thing about this is as well, and this is different from a pure VMware environment, is I can maintain a single, in this case, Windows Server 2012 VMDK, but I can have lots of templates that reference it. So one image, one 30 gig consumption of space, but lots of different templates with different configurations off the top of that. Which means instead in the VMware environment where I would have one template each with a VMDK consuming multiple amounts of disk space. Whereas here, once VMM's got its grip on it, it can start to apply different hardware profiles, guest OS profiles to that same gold VMDK. So it provides us a lot of value there. So the key thing is about the day-to-day management, the deployment, the management of those VMs, and the clouds and the services and service templates on top of that pure vSphere environment. So VMM still can provide a lot of value. So with that, I think we'll go back to the slides.
That's right. Well, one more demo actually. I'm going to go ahead and actually convert one of our VMware virtual machines over to a Hyper-V virtual machine. Now, we'll talk a little bit at the end of the day, kind of some of our different migration steps. Matt's been working a lot with different migration options as well. In fact, there's even a tool named after you, right? The Matt.
Yes. Well, I can not confirm or deny I was involved in anything of that. I was. Yeah, I was.
So what I'm looking at back on my screen here is I'm back to the Virtual Machine Manager library. Here I have a virtual machine from VMware that I've already imported. So we take a look at the settings down here. We still see, once again, ESX Server. So this is basically an offline virtual machine stored in my library. So let's go ahead to our VMs and Services workspace. And then under the Create Virtual Machine option, I have the second drop-down that says Convert Virtual Machine. What we're basically going to do here is go and select this VMware virtual machine. And then we're going to go and extract the various properties, this various metadata. And again, metadata are kind of structural definitions of how this item is built, such as what is the virtual memory What are the different physical drives it's connected to? So we'll call this our Hyper-V virtual machine. Get to adjust the number of processors. Now, since I don't have a whole lot of free memory on my host, I'm just going to bump that down real small. Then it's going to go and scan the different hosts that I have in my environment. Now, right now, I have one host that's available for placement. I go to my ratings explanation, and notice what this warning tells me here. It's reminding me that we are booting from different types of disk locations. Currently, this is configured to be booting from SCSI, as VMware usually does, but since this is going to be a Generation 1 virtual machine, we're going to move this to an IDE boot. So it's telling us, hey, you kind of got this additional step that you're going to need to do as part of this conversion. So I'm going to select Next. I'll specify the local path on this server. That's fine. We'll verify that we have access to place it there. So they're going to give me options to go and configure what type of virtual network I want to go and connect this to. So as I look at the virtual networks, I get kind of the same options that I would have if I was deploying a Hyper-V virtual machine. Now in this case, haven't configured my virtual network and infrastructure, so it's just going to kind of be a VM that's non-connected right now for the sake of the demo. We have some additional configuration options. Do we want to turn the VM on when the server starts? View the information, and then we have the View Script button once again. So if you're doing a scale-up deployment, plenty of VMs, follow the script, and batch it. So we're going to click Create. And basically, we go and copy the VMDK file to a VHD file. We go and extract the metadata from the hardware profile for that VMware VM, make it Hyper-V relevant information, such as, again, the memory, the storage, the other networking components. Now, we do get an error, which is expected here, because it's telling us, hey, we can't locate the boot volume. What happened to that? Well, again, remember we did this switch over from SCSI to IDE. So let me go take a look at this virtual machine we have. This is the newly created one. I could go edit the settings of this virtual machine.
That was an extremely small virtual machine, so not all migrations would be quite as quick as that if you were thinking, wow, that was fast. And it wasn't, yeah, it doesn't quite happen that fast for big VMs.
Great point, fair point. This is a demo environment, you know, let's be realistic here. Yeah, and then you could go back to just this final step here. Hey, we've now converted to IDE. We'll now say this is the disk which contains our operating system that we're going to boot from. Click OK. We update the configuration, and now I'd be able to go and actually start this virtual machine. Again, we're still working within these limitations of the virtualized lab environment, but that's kind of as simple as this process is to kind of get you from the start to the end there.
Now, it's important to add as well that you would need to, when using VMM, you'd need to remove the VMware tools first, because VMM won't do that part of the process. So, and you don't really need the VMware VM tools running when it's running on Hyper-V, because there's not much point there. So you would remove those, which kind of, you'd want to take a snapshot of your VM before you did that on the VMware side, just to make sure.
Great best practice, absolutely.
Yeah.
So next key component we're going to look at is managing with App Controller. So we already kind of gave you the preview of App Controller, infrastructure provisioning. But what this does is it allows us to provision to our VMware hosts as well, and our Xen server hosts. So as we go and pick a cloud that we deploy it on, this logical concept of a cloud, it can be mixed servers. The cloud can include ESX, and it can include Hyper-V, and it can include Citrix. So a lot of variety in your placement options.
And the key thing there with your users, the users who are using this self-service experience don't necessarily care about the underlying hypervisor. It's abstracted. All they see is a pool of capacity and their templates that they can deploy. And you could have one of those service templates we deployed earlier that could have a Hyper-V tier, a VMware tier, and a Xen server tier. And it just gets deployed across that infrastructure, that mixed cloud, flexibly each time.
Great. Next component we're going to look at here is Operations Manager, what we use for monitoring. Now, Operations Manager by itself doesn't monitor VMware. Remember this concept of extensibility that we call management packs. We need to go and add a management pack for VMware to our solution, and then we can start to read and understand that data. And this management pack is provided by one of our partners, Veeam Software. So you could sign up from Veeam Software's site, register for the management pack, And it is you do pay for it. It's not a free service, but it's one of the richest and most comprehensive management packs we've seen, providing monitoring throughout all these different components. Let's actually go and just take a look at the demo. So I've got this management pack up and running. It's installed on Operations Manager. So I just relaunch in my Operations Manager console here. And from Operations Manager, we will have the ability to go and browse all of these different alerts, all of these different settings. So I'm going to log in. I see all of these different alerts here. And whenever I show this demo, people kind of point out, wow, you have a lot of alerts here. Don't worry, a lot of them are coming from VMware. We never have a problem with our infrastructure here. Just teasing.
You're a brave man. You're a brave man.
So down here on the left, you can see I have my Veeam for VMware, giving me the ability to view all of these different active alerts from VMware. Now, as I kind of browse these different options, this is what we get coming out of the box. We could go take a look at the compute, the storage, the networking topologies, build rich visualizations that really show throughout the stack from the app to the metal of how a particular service is running. Views around the clusters, the data stores, the hosts, and the VMs. Dashboards for different views, including the vSwitches, and a dashboard for the Veeam collectors. The Veeam collectors is essentially an agent that you can install on the individual vCenter servers that goes and aggregates the information. You kind of think of this as similar to a Microsoft Operations Manager agent itself. Figures out what data we need, sends it over to us so that we can start to see views about this different topology. So as I go back to my alerts view here, we can see that we already have quite a few active alerts, about 19. You can see that it's covering the variety of topologies, from the hosts to snapshots, CPUs, all the way to data store. Now, as I take a look at our different topology view here, we can go and actually break down the different services in our data center. Now, it will take just a minute or two to allow this to load. Go to our compute topology here. And you're going to see this built-in native capability to build these rich topology diagrams. Now, while this loads, maybe we'll just quickly switch back to the demo here, move on as we are wrapping up on our time, and then we'll jump back to kind of show you this, this view in a minute. But with the rest of our presentation here, we're going to go and then move on to Orchestrator. So System Center Orchestrator. Again, this is our automation engine allowing us to connect these distributed systems. You can see here on the screen a lot of the different activities that we've supplied here. Now remember, this integration pack, this is our extensibility component, similar to a management pack we have with Operations Manager. It gives us a specific set of activities that perform a particular task. You have the ability to go and chain these individual tasks together to go and perform a series of actions. So as we browse through what VMware offers, we have the ability to go and add and remove different resources from our virtual machines, and even from our physical hosts. We can clone our VMs. We can, of course, create VMs and delete them. Then we can get information about the status of our various components. So maybe you want to find information about what's my data store capacity. If it's above a certain threshold, do a specific action. We can then also put things into maintenance mode. So if we want to start something like a patching cycle, ensure that we're not monitoring this host anymore while we're doing reboots, we're able to do that. We also have migration, so moving VMs through vMotion, modifying them, resetting them, and then some snapshot management, so we can take different states, different views of this particular snapshot.
And the beauty of Orchestrator and its integration pack from a vSphere perspective is the automation that it can provide, not just for vSphere specifically, but the fact that the workflows can combine lots of other components within your infrastructure, of which vSphere could be just one. So for instance, you could be utilizing the ticketing capability within Service Manager to request something or perform some kind of task. And the runbook that could be connected to that could be performing the actions associated with that task against vCenter. So it could be, for instance, new user is requesting a new machine for some kind of development work. They fill in a form in Service Manager that captures the information they need. That particular runbook that we see, similar to the one we see on the bottom of the slide here, gets the information from that form from Service Manager and talks to vCenter and vSphere, supplying the relevant information, the VM name, the size, the disk, the capacity, etc. All of those different pieces, and what pops out at the end is a new virtual machine that's been automated in its deployment from that initial form, and it's standardized, it's consistent every single time.
All right, well, let's jump back to the demo system, and I'll kind of give you a very brief tour of Orchestrator here as well. So what do you actually see here? We haven't gone and loaded our VMware activities yet. This is just an example of some of the richness that you can use with a sample workflow. In this example, we're able to take input parameters, such as the name of a checkpoint, the ID of a checkpoint, the name of a virtual machine, and then we go and pass those along as strings. This is again going through that data bus where we put things into plain text and allow it to move from one system to another. So once we've received this information, it could come through a self-service portal, it could be manually entered, and these types of activities could also be triggered from things such as Service Manager or Operations Manager alerts. We tie in all of these different system center systems. Once we get this information from our checkpoints, we could essentially go and tie together this end-to-end workflow here. Now, are there any questions that have come up while we wait for this to load?
Let me just check.
All right, well, we are back anyway, so we could jump back to the demo here. It is loaded. So as you kind of go through this different workflow, this is the get VM activity. You can see what we're able to do here is actually take the parameter from here and include it here. So we're basically saying, I want to take this virtual machine name and I want to use it here. And if this virtual machine matches the input's name, then we continue through our workflow. So you see that we can build in conditional statements as well. If we don't get any results, we're just going to write an event to our event log. We do get results, we could go and do a filter, and based on the different actions, we go run a script, manage checkpoints, and then again write to the event log. Well, let's switch over to VMware and go and quickly create a sample VMware workflow. So I can say I want to create a new runbook here. We're going to go and do what we call check it out, which means that we can edit it. Then from the VMware world, we could go and start to receive information. So maybe I want to go and get the properties of my cluster. So first thing we'll set up here is say get cluster properties. When I load this activity, it's going to give me the ability to go and specify which parameters I want to go and use. Now, as we look across all of the different VMware activities that we have, there's kind of a lot you can do. And if there's not an activity that you need, you can also have the ability to go and initialize data from another source. So pull it from a self-service portal, for example, or go and look at Operations Manager. We could go and call one runbook from another runbook, so we have nested runbooks. But another, let me show you the Operations Manager one. Get an alert, go receive that as information. So every time we see an alert from the Veeam management pack that says there's a problem with our cluster, we could go and find information about that cluster, and then based on the properties of that cluster, perform other actions. So maybe once we find out that this cluster is too busy, we're going to go and start to delete some different virtual machines from it. We connect the dots, get the information, get information about the cluster, delete the virtual machine, and we've built a workflow. Now, we can trigger these on schedule, we can trigger these on scripts, trigger these automatically. And again, if this doesn't exist, go create your own. Orchestrator comes with its own software development kit, SDK, that allows you to go and create these different custom activities. But let me now switch back to Operations Manager and make sure that I show you the rest of these rich capabilities here from Veeam and their management pack. So what I've done now is I've moved into what we call our compute topology view. And what this has done is it's a self-discovery mechanism to go build dependencies throughout your entire data center. So I start here with my vCenter group. I can then go and get information. So we're going to take a look at one of the subgroups. Once we expand that subgroup, we're going to see the different clusters and the different resource pools available in it. In this case, we have a cluster. Now we're going to go and adjust the view here so that we can kind of zoom out and keep growing this network topology. In comparison to some other third-party monitoring operating systems, we don't have any limitations on how many layers of this topology we can view. We can go as many layers as there are. A little slow performance here. We'll keep expanding these as we go along. But essentially what you're able to do here, go build up this rich end-to-end view. Now, another nice capability provided by this management pack is looking at different types of performance data as well. We can see performance data from our disks, other resources. The Veeam management pack also includes a lot of built-in reports, so you can see things such as which disks are running out of capacity, how soon they may run out of capacity, and a variety of other useful information. So as I scroll down through my reports view and take a look at different history reports, different resource reports, and get all the information that I need. Now these reports, they can get saved, they can get exported, they can get published to different locations, different sites. So we can really try to find different ways that we go and present that information for our users. All right, now we're going to move on and spend just a minute talking about VMware to Hyper-V migration. First topic that we have here is looking at the map toolkit. And we have 8.5 listed here, but we've actually just released version 9.0 as well the past couple of weeks. So it's even better now, even more enhanced. Matt, why don't you take this one away?
Yeah, so the map tool is a very valuable solution. It's free, it's agentless. Not only can it assess your broad infrastructure for things like Office upgrades, Windows client upgrades, Windows Server upgrades, and so on. It does a whole host of different provides a whole host of different scenarios that it can be very valuable across both cloud, server, desktop virtualization, databases, usage tracking, all sorts. One of the key things it can provide is VMware migration in such a way that it can actually go out and inventory your vSphere infrastructure, so it will go and detect and analyze and understand what VMs are running on what hosts, what versions, what you've got out there. And from there, it will actually produce a report to provide you back useful information about what percentage of your virtual infrastructure is ready to migrate with some of our key inbox tools, like the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter, which I'll touch on in a minute, which may require a few changes to the VMs to make it applicable, or which VMs can't be migrated at all, and give a reason as to why that's the case. So that's a really useful tool that might just help you, even if you're not thinking about migrating, if you've got a big vSphere infrastructure, it might just give you a good grip on exactly what you've got in a nice published Word document report and spreadsheet as well. But it can be used also, not only from a V2V perspective, but it can also be used to identify low-hanging fruit to be virtualized if you're starting on your virtualization journey at this point in time. But in terms of if you do want to convert, we saw Simon do a demonstration of the V2V, so converting the disk layer before. But also we have a solution known as the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter, MVMC. And MVMC is a free solution, and version 1 is currently available, and it allows you to convert vSphere VMs running on ESXi 4, 4.1 or 5, so not some of the later releases at this point in time, not 5.5 for sure, and it converts those VMs across to run on Hyper-V. Not 2012 R2 at this point though, but we are working on future versions and there'll be more to share on a newer version of MVMC very soon, but at this time there's no news unfortunately. But MVMC, just to get the concept across of what it is, it's a standalone product. It's like at this stage in version 1, it's about a 4 or 5 meg download. It runs on a machine that you want to dedicate to migrate. You point it at your vSphere infrastructure and you select a VM that you'd like to convert. It will handle the snapshotting, it will handle the removal of the VMware tools, and then it will bring that virtual machine and its VMDK, convert the necessary bits of that, the data and also the virtual machine config file, and bring it over to your Hyper-V target. Now it doesn't destroy the original machine, it still leaves it there if you do want to just test this out, but you will have a migration solution that is allowing you to migrate those in a little bit more of an intelligent way without the requirement to have VMM as well. Now, one key difference is it does only support Windows operating systems at this point in time, some of the more modern ones. It is scriptable, which is what we've done with the migration automation toolkit. the mat that Simon was referring to earlier. It's only got one T, so it couldn't quite get the branding through with an extra T for me there. But the Migration Automation Toolkit essentially is a freely available set of PowerShell scripts and capability that enables you to scale out MVMC conversions. Because as we had it before, with just a single MVMC, it will convert one VM at a time through the UI. But if you combine that with the MAT tool, what that essentially allows you to do is scale out and place multiple MVMC instances. So you've got loads of little converters, and these could be VMs themselves, or they could be physical machines that are handling the conversion, and they are controlled centrally from this PowerShell script. So the MAT is actually controlling lots of MVMCs that are all doing conversions themselves. So you essentially use the MAT to communicate with vSphere, pull in all of your VMs, you mark a batch of VMs that you want to convert in this particular run. It could be 5, 10, however many you want it to be. And MAT will orchestrate going through that list of items, placing them on different MVMC converters. So let's say, for instance, you've got 5 MVMC converter machines. MAT grabs a list of 10 VMs from vCenter and places 2 on each of those converters. And it will orchestrate the conversion of those in a scaled fashion. And it's community driven, so you can enhance and build on what's in the MAT and customize it to your specific needs as well. Freely available. Do a search for Migration Automation Toolkit, or check out the Building Clouds blog as well for more information on that under the migration section. So loads of useful stuff there to help, and it can be extended. And we've seen some of our partners, the likes of NetApp, with using MAT for Project Shift, which is using their filer, their NetApp filer, to speed up and accelerate the conversion process. And also DoubleTake, one of our other partners who has a conversion engine to convert VMs or VMware VMs to Hyper-V VMs. Again, they're scaling that out through integration with the MAT. So lots of cool stuff, lots of options, and we'll have more to share on migration in the coming weeks. And that brings us to the end.
All right, well, let's wrap it up here. We did want to end on time for you guys, and I think we pulled that off pretty well. Matt's got a soccer match to get to, football match, sorry.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I don't know how English we're trying to be here. So as we kind of wrap it up here, the highlights that we just want to cover are, we really hope that we showed you the basics of virtualization. Not just how to do it, but also the best practices around to do it. We want to build that key infrastructure, but then also make it highly available. If you can't access your services, your VMs, and your networks, well, you might as well not have them. So we really always want to think about building resiliency, whether that's for unplanned downtime with clustering or for planned maintenance, taking advantage of features like our new live migration. We also want to remind people about disaster recovery too. You lose that whole data center, we have a free inbox replication solution, allowing you to replicate your Hyper-V virtual machines across sites. With System Center itself as well, we hope to show you that we can manage pretty richly using VMM as kind of our single centralized management console. We manage all of our infrastructure, including our storage, our networking. As we start to think about using cloud-based capabilities and building standardization in our processes, we have services and service templates. And last but not least, don't forget those other System Center components with self-service, automation, monitoring, backup, and recovery. Finally, VMware management as well. If you're an existing VMware customer thinking of moving to the Microsoft stack, you can make that transition gradually. Switching from VMware to Microsoft doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, it's a transition. But as you still have those existing VMware investments, thinking about using new Microsoft investments, you can use System Center as this manager of manager, allowing you to manage both VMware and Hyper-V solutions. Now, here's a list of resources that we're going to publish. We'll make this available online, but you may want to take a quick screenshot of this. This essentially points you to the technical documentation across all of these different tools. We also want to make you aware that we have all of this software available as a completely free evaluation. This includes Windows Server, all the System Center component, so you can actually get to try this out and experiment with it yourself. We also have our certifications available online. Quickly going to switch to the our web page here and show you the 74409 exam, Server Virtualization with System Center Hyper-V, with Windows Server Hyper-V and System Center. This course that we've gone through today will certainly give you some best practices around actually being able to successfully use this. Because you look at deploying Hyper-V, configuring high availability, managing server virtualization with VMware, and then monitoring and maintaining the infrastructure. So this is a great course to wrap up, and if you're looking for additional training, make sure you check the Microsoft Virtual Academy, as we're continuing to post different courses, different topics, including a 2-day deep dive on that specific virtualization course we ran a couple of weeks ago.
There's also been a new ebook published just recently on networking. So I'm guessing that is a topic and an area that, whilst we covered it in as much depth as we had time, it's very vast and complex, all of the logical stuff, port profiles and so on. So you can check that out on there, as well as loads of links from the MVA site for your ebooks. So very, very valuable ebook on networking.
That's right. And so if you're on the Microsoft Academy homepage, click on the courses drop-down, then you'll see the free ebooks. Now, if you're watching the recorded version of this, missed our live event, come back to the MVA and you'll see that we list all of our upcoming live events as well. So you can stay on top of all of these different technologies, all of these different resources as well. Now, finally, I want to point you to our TechNet Virtual Labs. At the very beginning of this session, we teased you and said, everything that we've demoed today, we have made available for you. And we have this on our TechNet VLabs. So the shortcut to this is aka.ms/VLabs. This will take you to the main TechNet Virtual Labs site. Down here, select Hot Lab number 1, and then Hot Lab number 2, and this will take you through everything that Matt and I have demoed today.
Yep.
This spins up a real virtualized environment, literally the same one that we were doing. This is just the one we built. We ported it to our hoster. They're now running it, and it includes all those step-by-step guides, so you'll get the hands-on experience to do it yourself.
Yeah, it doesn't include the VMware management bits, but it does include everything we covered up until clouds and user roles and those kind of bits. So yeah, you'll get a good grip of the Microsoft virtualization pieces.
Now, as we wrap things up, we want to remind you, certainly stay focused on Microsoft virtualizations. If you're an existing VMware admin, becoming bilingual in virtualization is becoming an increasingly important trend. Now, finally, I want to thank all of our production staff, production assistants, and certainly our Q&A people. They've done a great job throughout the day, keeping that queue empty, answering all of your questions. If you have any additional questions, we'd recommend posting to the TechNet forums. Those are constantly monitored by the engineering team, as well as other Microsoft MVPs that will get those very specific questions answered for you. Final thing we want to encourage you to do is take a look at the poll. We have our final poll here, which is our satisfaction survey, telling us how much did you like the event, or if you didn't like it. Now, if you didn't like it, hopefully you're not even on the line anymore, so we hopefully won't get any no likes here. And if you didn't like it anyway, you don't have to vote. You can consider that an optional poll. For those of you that loved it, give us the good thumbs up, give us your blessing, and we'll see you probably sometime in the near future again for another Jumpstart. Thanks.